In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Let nothing upset you, let nothing startle you. All things pass, God does not change. Patience wins all it seeks. Whoever has God lacks nothing. God alone is enough. Well, here we are, and we've come to our final dwelling places here in Mansion 7. It is here in this mansion where the soul experiences the type of prayer where God fills our emptiness with His fullness and our darkness with His light. Here in this mansion, we are enabled to become fully human, fully ourselves, and God will unravel the mystery of His personhood, where we will have a vision of the Blessed Trinity and understand who we are called to be as full persons created in the image and likeness of God. Now, just a little bit of context. Saint Teresa's betrothal, scholars think, took place on November the 18th, 1572. So we think her spiritual marriage took place sometime between that and May of 1575, but we can't tell the exact date. But I think it's helpful to talk about two events that Teresa shares with us. Here's just kind of going back in time, just to give us context. In 1560, I want to emphasize this is a date that scholars say divides the story of Teresa's life into two parts. Prior to this, she was struggling with her sins, her conversion's happening, but her mission in the church is not moving. We see nothing of the foundress. But all of this is going to change after 1560. After that, she changes her name from Teresa de Ahumada to Teresa de Jesus. She changes her name. She moves much closer to doing everything for God, and her writings come after this period. The second event is November of 1572. She just received the Eucharist from St. John of the Cross, and here's what she says. While at Incarnacion in the second year that I was prioress, on the octave of the feast of St. Martin, when I was receiving communion, Father John of the Cross, who was giving me the Blessed Sacrament, broke the host to provide for another sister. I thought he wanted to mortify to me, but the Lord said, "Do not fear, daughter, for no one will separate you from me." The Lord made me understand that what happened didn't matter in regarding the splitting of the Eucharist, and then the Lord appeared to me in an imaginative vision, as at other times interiorly. He gave me his right hand and said, "Behold this nail. It is a sign you will be my bride from today on. Until now you have not merited this. From now on, not only will you look after my honor as being the honor of your Creator, King, and God, but you will look after it as my true bride. My honor is yours, and yours mine." This favor produced such an effect in me I couldn't contain myself, and I remained as though in trance. I asked the Lord to raise me from my loneliness, for it didn't seem that my nature could bear it. So this is a big event for Teresa, where she leaves her betrothal behind and enters into spiritual marriage. I think it's important to note that the mark of her marriage is the nail of the cross, which is very consistent with everything we've seen with Saint Teresa, who was always interested in concrete images. It would make sense that the Lord would work with her in that way. And it's a reminder that we each have our own unique way in dealing with the Lord. Now, in the seventh mansion, the grace of prayer is different from the sixth and seventh dwelling places, because during the betrothal, you're betrothed to the Lord, but you can still separate. In the seventh mansion, there's no separation. And Teresa says all her desires and her longings came to an end. Now God unites the soul with himself. Unlike the other mansions, he doesn't make the soul blind and deaf. Now God removes the scales from its eyes and lets it understand something of the favor he has granted to it. When this is happening, the vision is trinitarian. There emerges in the deepest center of the soul a deep understanding of the Holy Trinity. Teresa gives us another example of this in her spiritual testimonies. Here's what she writes. On the Tuesday following Ascension Thursday, having remained a while in prayer after communion, I was grieved because I was so distracted I couldn't concentrate. I complained to the Lord. My soul began to enkindle, and it seemed that I knew clearly in an intellectual vision that the entire blessed Trinity was present. In this state, my soul understood by a certain kind of representation, like an illustration of the truth in such a way that my dullness could perceive how God is three and one. And so it seemed to me that all three persons were represented distinctly in my soul, and that they spoke to me, telling me that from this day I would see an improvement in myself. I understood the words from the Lord that these three divine persons would be with my soul in grace, and I saw them within myself. So Teresa has an image of the Trinity living inside herself. Thanks be to God she did, because as a doctor of the church, she's telling us in the seventh mansion, somehow our spiritual marriage and encounter will be comprised something of the Trinity, all three persons. In this spiritual marriage, she says, we will not be able to be separated, as I mentioned before, like in the betrothal. And here's an example, an image that she uses. She says, let us say that the union is like the joining of two wax candles to such an extent that the flame and the wax are one. And this is what the spiritual marriage is like. She gives many other images. She says it's like when rain falls from the sky into a river or fount. All its water, for the rain that fell from heaven, cannot be divided from the water or the river. Another example, she says, is when a little stream enters the sea. You cannot separate the two. Or the bright light entering a room through two different windows. Although the streams of light are separate, when entering the room, they become one. These are marvelous examples of what the spiritual marriage is, coming from creation itself, which is what she likes to do. Now she says the little butterfly dies. So the butterfly dies, and the soul cannot help but say all day long phrases of love to God. Things like, "O life of my life." I thought this would be a good reminder for us to try this. Do you have a phrase that you love to say to the Lord? It's a beautiful practice to say it to Him all day long. She says, while the soul may still have trials, fatigues, war, it doesn't lose its peace as a rule. She says the king is in his palace. There's many wars going on, many painful things going on, but in the center of the soul is at peace. The suffering does not disturb it or take away its peace. Why? Because the passions are conquered. She says that it doesn't mean life is perfect. It doesn't mean you don't suffer, but it's going to be in a different way. I think it's interesting here in looking at Mansion 7 and really through the whole castle. Scholars point out that Teresa is relying a lot on St. Paul and Pauline images. A lot of Paul's autobiographical testimonies become Teresa's. She maintains this definition of her Christian existence from the very beginning all the way to the end of the book. She will echo St. Paul, who says, I no longer live, but you, Creator, you live in me. This is how she understood her own life. I think because Teresa understands her life as Pauline, we should remember in the church, it is customary to choose other saints that we imitate. For example, St. Augustine imitated St. Anthony of the Desert. If you read the Confessions, you see a lot of circles of imitation. Augustine was also imitating St. Ambrose. Later, St. Teresa is going to imitate Augustine. In the 19th century, Saint Theresa, the little flower, she will imitate Saint Teresa of Avila. In the 20th century, St. Edith Stein will read Saint Teresa of Avila and imitate her. And then much later in our time, we can think of Mother Teresa of Calcutta. That is customary in the church, where we look at the legacy of another saint and we live it out, but in our own unique way. We don't take away our own individuality, but as human beings, we imitate. And St. Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. And she was clearly doing that. Moving on to talk about the effects of this union in chapter 3, she talks about forgetfulness of self. She says the soul doesn't worry about what can happen. It just kind of forgets about it. The soul's just concerned with serving one's neighbor and serving the Lord. She also says souls feel tremendous love for their persecutors. They have a tender love for those who persecute them, because the Lord's always in your mind. She says the Lord has fortified, enlarged, and made the soul capable because he has kissed the bride. This kiss from the Lord makes the soul do amazing things. And then she has different images of talking about how the soul finally finds its rest. I really like the one she uses from Genesis chapter 8, where Noah sends out the dove. She says, here the dove Noah sent out to see if the storm was over, finds the olive branch as a sign of firm ground discovered from the floods and tempests of this world. So she's using a lot of imagery. I like this particular one. Now she says, sometimes the poisonous creatures from outside the mansion will come in and bother the soul. They'll try to, she says, band together to take revenge for the time they were unable to have these souls under their control. So there will still be trouble. But she says it lasts only a short while and the soul has peace. And the way she describes the peace in the soul is through, I think, a really wonderful analysis of the combination of Mary and Martha. Here she says Mary and Martha are joined. Teresa has a lot to say about Mary Magdalene, and she considers Mary Magdalene to be the sinful woman with the alabaster jar. So she cleverly states that Mary was being Martha when she anointed Jesus's feet. So at this level of prayer and life in Mansion 7, the soul is Martha and Mary at the same time. I think this is a wonderful image. They work together. The two sisters in Bethany are symbols of human life. Of course, Martha stands for action, Mary for contemplation, but now here they are. There's no longer a disassociation between the two. And I think we all struggle with our own inner Mary and Martha. How nice it would be to have them be best friends and work together. She says here, the Lord doesn't look so much at the greatness of our works as the love which they are done. Doesn't that sound familiar? It sounds very much like Saint Teresa, the little flower. After she closes Mansion 7, if you read the epilogue, she says, although no more than 7 dwelling places are discussed, remember, in each of these there are many others, below and above and to the sides, with lovely gardens and fountains and labyrinths, such delightful things. So as St. John of the Cross does this too, all the saints do. They always say, look, I've written this for you. Yes, here it is. But there's much more. We think of Aquinas with his vision of the Lord, and then after he saw the Lord, he said, everything I've written is straw. All the saints do this. They're giving us something in human language, but ultimately what God can do for us is much bigger and much more, and everything won't be contained in those books. She says this writing was finished in the monastery of St. Joseph of Avila in the year 1577, the eve before the feast of St. Andrew, for the glory of God who lives and reigns forever. And that's November the 29th, 1577. Today is November the 21st, so kind of feeling very close to her as we're completing our 7 mansions we feel very close to her. And a reminder as we enter deeper into the castle, it doesn't mean we're moving away from the outside world. In fact, the works that we do in service of our neighbor will be that much stronger. I did want to end with a book that I mentioned in Mansion 6. It's really fascinating. In Sister Prudence Allen's book on the concept of woman, she has a chapter on Teresa, and then she has a chapter on John. And I think these two chapters are magnificent because she asks the difficult question: if all souls are called to be bride, with Christ our bridegroom, what do we tell men? I really like how she asks the question because it's easier for a woman to imagine being a bride than it is for a man. And so she does really a penetrating analysis of John's works and really how the man has to suffer almost a spiritual death to embrace his identity as a bride. Isn't this fascinating? We could do a whole other podcast on this series, but I think for men and women of our time, we should really examine those issues in depth, because Pope Saint John Paul II said we need Teresa and John if we're going to be saints in modern times. And so I think the fact that Sister Prudence raises those questions and gives us some meat to chew on is very encouraging for both men and women as we close up our study of the interior castle. Just want to say thank you to anyone who took the time to listen or to read or to pray with us. I don't think there's anything more important for us to do than read books like this together. And my hope and my prayer is that having entered the interior castle, even for just a little bit, or thinking about it in ways you haven't thought about it before, will bear fruit in eternity. Thank you for listening.